The quote that you cite in your Rolling Stone article from FDR, I thought was it shocked me how explicitly he was making the connection between economic issues and basically the rise of fascism.
Yeah,
He said democracy has disappeared in several other great nations, not because the people of those nations disliked democracy, but because they had grown tired of unemployment and insecurity, of seeing their children hungry while they sat helpless in the face of government confusion and government weakness through lack of leadership. Finally, in desperation, they chose to sacrifice liberty in the hope of getting something to eat.
exactly. I mean, that's it, right? Like that is it. Now, you can argue, look, it's not as dire right now in the United States. People, I mean, there is hunger, but it's not, there's not mass starvation. But my view is when it comes to democracy, when it comes to the erosion of democracy, it really is like that cliche of the frog in the water. That,
Mm,
I don't think, and look, I'm not saying, Donald Trump is a Nazi, and I'm not saying we're
right.
going to be the Third Reich. I just want to be clear about that. But the erosion of democracy is something, it's not like, Germany woke up in 1932 and was like, hey, you know what, we decided to be Nazis, right? Like, it's just not how it works. Right? It's a gradual process of disillusionment, of insults, of insults. It's the governmental boot kicking people in the face over and over and over again. And by the way, not in a right-wing way, not in like a Ronald Reagan. I'm not trying to sound like, the 13 scariest or the 9 scariest words in the world of the government's here to help. It's that the government refuses to help.
Right.
It's that the
They claim that they're going to help and then they don't.
Yes, and on display in full public view, the government explicitly helping the rich and powerful. I go back to one of the huge problems with TARP and the bailout. And I know, and Matt, I know you've reported on this, uh, TARP was paid back. It was a good program. Like it was, the government didn't even really help the banks. Like the banks paid the money back, right? You hear that.
Made a profit.
Yeah, they made a profit. I mean, it's like such garbage. First of all, it's actually garbage. The amount of aid that the banks got was way more than the TARP program. So on the facts, it's garbage. But I also think, let's say even if that was true, let's like pretend even part of that's true. It's still sending a message that we are here to rescue the richest and most powerful people while everybody else suffers, right? Like that's the message you're sending with a top-down bailout. And I know there are Obama administration officials. Oh, well, that's what we had to do. We had to do a top-down bailout. I would argue, no, you didn't. You were just too uncreative or frankly corrupt and captured to figure out a different policy. And I think that's also written out of how we remember that era, which is that Barack Obama raised a record amount of money from Wall Street. It's just like wiped out from the public memory. So is it really that surprising that he got into office and made policy choices first and foremost to save his donors? I know people don't like to think of him as corrupt. And look, is he as nakedly corrupt as somebody like Donald Trump, sort of explicitly celebrating how corrupt he is? No. Is it a corrupt system that he essentially didn't challenge at all? I would argue absolutely. And I would argue that if Joe Biden right now doesn't change that paradigm, then everyone should expect the same results or worse.
Okay, so here's a really uncomfortable question. Why is it necessary to do meltdown now? I mean, it feels like a lot of this had to do with the press refusal to look at these issues, specifically in 2016, where it almost became taboo to even look at this subject and suggest that it was even something that could be considered. Could you talk a little bit about
Sure.
that aspect of it?
Yeah, look, I think the reason to do it now is precisely because of what you just said, which is this is a story that the media, the corporate media, has just at best not been interested in, at worst has been hostile to. I also think that the corporate media has got so obsessed with Donald Trump's antics and ridiculousness and blatant cartoonish corruption that a story like this there was no room for it. And I also think, and this is really important, that the Democratic Party and liberals don't want to own up to reality, that the Democratic Party wants to blame every single thing other than looking at itself and its own corruption and its own essentially inherent conflict. The inherent conflict of the Democratic Party is that it is a party that is trying to simultaneously appease its corporate donors and look like it is delivering help to people who are being screwed by its corporate donors. That creates a party that is often incoherent because those two goals are often at odds with each other, mutually exclusive. You can either enrich your donors, you can either enrich the pharmaceutical companies by not letting Medicare negotiate lower prices for drugs, as a specific example, or you can make your pharmaceutical donors mad, let Medicare negotiate lower prices for drugs, and make voters happy and deliver on your promises to voters. Those two things, you got to make a choice. And if you try to not make a choice, then you sound incoherent. And if you ultimately side with your corporate donors, guess what? Voters are going to be pissed off. The reason to tell this story is because it's a story that hasn't been told. And I should add, you're absolutely right. The media was incredibly hostile to this story, to these facts. It's not a story, these facts in 2016. You had Steve Bannon told New York Magazine that the financial crisis, that the legacy of the financial crisis is Donald Trump. That's a direct quote. The legacy of the financial crisis is Donald Trump. I may have messed up this or whatever, but you can look at that. That is a direct, Steve Bannon just said that. You could say he's, a liar and a demagogue and a evil person or whatever, but that tracks. That is absolutely true. And if that is not recognized right now, then history will repeat itself. I also think, look, one other point on the media stuff. I think that part of the reason why this story hasn't been told in media is because media was complicit. Corporate media doesn't want another story told. Corporate media fell down on the job in reporting on the lead up to the financial crisis. Just
before and after,
from CNBC to just cheering on the bubble and all that stuff, and fell down on the job when reporting on what was happening after the financial crisis, and fell down on the job in terms of how the response to the crisis was not only ineffective, but in my view was a corrupt, in many cases, corrupt sellout to the Wall Street donors who had bankrolled Obama's campaign and who had created the crisis. It's just, and I realize it. They just, the Rolling Stone article came out today, and there were folks on Twitter who was like, "Oh, you're just blaming the Democrats for everything. You don't want to blame the Republicans." But the point is, if you can't acknowledge that when the Democrats were in power, that they did these things, and if you can't acknowledge that right now they are in power and have a chance to make a different decision, if you can't acknowledge that and you just want to blame the Republicans, then you're not living in the real world.
Hello, thank you so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For full episodes and extended interviews, please subscribe at usefulidiots.substack.com. You can subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/usefulidiots for clips, live streams, and full episodes. Also, subscribe to us wherever you find your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod and use the hashtag UsefulIdiotsPod. Join us Mondays at 10 a.m. for the Useful Idiots Monday Morning Show, where we discuss the Sunday morning news shows so you don't have to watch them.